She never meant to change a life that night. In the middle of a thunderstorm, a young nurse slammed her car to a stop because a biker was bleeding out on the highway while everyone else sped past. She knelt in the rain, pressed her hands to his wound and whispered, "You're not dying tonight, but fate doesn't forget." A few months later, that same man found her cornered in an alley, 3 men closing in, fear in her eyes, and he roared back on a Harley, scattering them into the dark. The life she'd once saved had just saved hers. What began as a single act of courage would ignite a story of loyalty, redemption, and the echo of one whispered promise. Stay with me. You're watching Heart Tales. Subscribe now, because kindness always finds its way back. Let's check in. 1 for first-time viewer, 2 if you've seen a few, 3 if you never miss. Rain hammered the highway in sheets so thick they blurred the world into streaks of grey and silver. Thunder rolled somewhere deep beyond the hills, the sky hanging heavy and low. Headlights cut through the downpour, halos of white fighting the gloom, tires hissing as cars sped past the wreckage that no one wanted to see. Somewhere in that storm, metal screamed. A Harley spun out, its chrome body colliding with the guardrail before sliding across the soaked asphalt. Sparks hissed, drowned by the rain. When the motion stopped, silence followed, a cruel, hollow kind of quiet broken only by the steady drumming of water against steel. Lena Hart was driving home from a 12-hour shift, her windshield wipers thrashing at the torrent. The hospital scrubs clung damp to her skin, her eyes gritty from exhaustion. She just wanted coffee, warmth, the illusion of calm. Then, through the curtain of rain, something flashed. A shape sprawled on the shoulder, a bike on its side, a boot lying alone in the road. Her stomach tightened. Every instinct told her to keep driving, like everyone else was doing, but her hands were already moving. The car swerved onto the shoulder, hazard lights flaring against the grey. She pushed the door open, and the storm punched her in the face, cold and furious. She ran. Water splashed up her legs, lightning cracked far off, and the world narrowed to a single figure lying broken in the rain. The Harley's front wheels still spun weakly, creaking like a wounded animal. The man beside it wasn't moving. His leather jacket was torn, the patches half ripped from the impact, his chest rising only in shallow bursts. "Hey!" she shouted over the storm, dropping to her knees. "Can you hear me?" No response, just a thin, wet breath that might have been a gasp. She touched his neck. Faint pulse, too faint. The smell of blood mixed with gasoline filled the air, thick and metallic. "You're not dying out here," she said, half plea, half order. "Not tonight." Lena ripped open the front of his jacket, rainwater running down his chest, washing streaks of red across her hands. The wound near his ribs pulsed under pressure, gushing with each heartbeat. She tore off her scarf and pressed it hard against the wound, her arms trembling. He jerked in pain, a muffled sound catching in his throat. "Breathe," she whispered. "Come on, stay with me." A car slowed nearby, the driver's face a blur behind fogged glass. Then it accelerated again, taillights disappearing into the rain. Another passed, honking as if angry she'd stopped. "Don't look at them," she muttered, almost to herself. "You're gonna make it." Lightning split the sky, bathing the highway in white for a heartbeat. She saw his face then, blood-streaked, strong-jawed, maybe mid-30s, a scar already visible beneath the grime. His lips moved just enough to whisper something she couldn't hear. "It's okay," Lena said, leaning close. "I've got you." The storm didn't care. It poured harder, drenching them both. Her fingers went numb from the cold, her knees burned against the asphalt, but she held pressure, steady and unrelenting, counting the rhythm of his chest. 1, 2, skip, 1. The pattern terrified her. She thought of her father collapsing years ago on the kitchen floor, no one there soon enough to save him, the sound of her own voice screaming into the phone, the helplessness that had driven her into medicine. She refused to feel it again. "You're not going where he went," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I'm here." The man's hand twitched, fingers brushing her arm. She grabbed it instinctively, gripping tight. "That's it! Stay with me!" Far off through the thunder she heard sirens, thin, fragile threads of sound cutting through the storm. Relief surged through her chest. "You hear that?" she said, voice shaking. "Hold on. Just a little longer." He didn't answer, but his pulse beat faintly against her fingertips, stubborn and alive. She stayed there, soaked to the bone, until red and blue lights flickered through the rain. Paramedics rushed forward, their shouts almost lost in the thunder. One knelt beside her, eyes widening at the sight. "You kept him breathing?" he asked. Lena nodded, her lips trembling from cold. "Then you gave him a shot." They lifted him onto a stretcher, their boots splashing through puddles. She watched as they loaded him into the ambulance, the rain pounding against the metal doors. For a brief instant before they closed, his eyes flickered open, grey and distant, but alive. Their gaze met. Then the doors slammed shut. The siren rose again, fading into the distance until only the storm remained. Lena stood there, drenched, shaking, her hands stained dark with a stranger's blood. Cars still passed, engines hissing through puddles. None of them stopped. She wrapped her arms around herself, the rain masking the tears she didn't notice. She had saved hundreds of lives inside the safety of a hospital. But this was different. This was chaos and raw will, two lives colliding in a downpour neither would ever forget. When she finally climbed back into her car, the interior fogged instantly from her breath. She sat motionless, staring at her trembling hands. Outside, the highway shimmered under streetlights, the puddles reflecting flashes of blue still fading in the distance. She whispered into the silence, "Please, make it." That night, she dreamed of rain, of headlights slicing through it, of a heartbeat she couldn't let stop. She woke with the sound of engines in her ears, though her street was quiet. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere in the city, that same heartbeat she fought for was still going, and one day it would come roaring back into her life, louder than thunder. 6 years passed, and the storm that had nearly taken his life had long since faded from memory, at least for Lena Hart. The rain had been replaced by sunlight, but not warmth. The world had grown quieter, harder, a little colder with every year. She still worked double shifts at St. Anne's Hospital, her smile practiced, her voice steady. But the exhaustion was no longer just physical, it had seeped into her bones. Her mother's health was failing. Medical bills towered on the kitchen counter like a second skyline. Her savings had vanished months ago, eaten alive by rent and prescriptions. Every day she gave her strength away to patients who didn't remember her name. Every night she came home to the hum of a fridge that was almost empty and a silence that didn't end. But she kept moving, because that's what nurses do. They keep moving, even when everything else stops. That evening, after another 12-hour shift, Lena left the hospital under a pale sun that dipped low behind the buildings. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a tired knot. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and cut through the narrow alley she always used, a shortcut that saved 10 minutes. It had always been quiet, harmless, but not tonight. 3 men stepped out of the shadows, their laughter slicing through the still air. One was tall and broad, a jagged tattoo creeping up his neck. The second reeked of alcohol, his grin wide and cruel. The third flicked a cigarette into a puddle, the hiss echoing off the brick walls. Lena froze, her fingers tightening around her bag. "What do you want?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay calm. The one with the tattoo tilted his head. "What do you think, sweetheart? You shouldn't walk alone. Dangerous world out here. Then maybe you should stay off the streets," she said quietly, trying to keep her fear hidden behind the same tone she used on violent patients. That only made them laugh. The tall one stepped closer, water dripping from his jacket. "Feisty. I like that." Lena's heart pounded. She took a step back, but they circled her, boots splashing in shallow puddles. The smell of rain still hung in the air, heavy with gasoline and rot. She swallowed hard. "Don't touch me!" The drunk one sneered. "Or what? Are you going to call for help?" He reached out, fingers brushing her arm. She slapped his hand away, but his grin only widened. Then the air changed. At first it was just a vibration underfoot, subtle enough to seem imagined. Then it grew, a low, rolling thunder that swallowed the sound of their laughter. The men froze. The echo of engines grew louder, deeper, closer. The alley filled with light, headlights slicing through the shadows, chrome catching the last gleam of the setting sun. The roar of engines rolled in like a storm reborn, 6 Harleys cutting through the narrow street. The men turned, shielding their eyes from the glare. "What the hell?" The bike stopped in a perfect line, engines idling in rhythm, and from the front one stepped a man in black leather, his boots splashing into the puddles, his presence filling the narrow space like smoke. He took off his helmet. His hair was shorter now, streaked with sun and grit. A faint scar carved across his cheek, just beneath the edge of a pair of storm-grey eyes. Lena's breath caught. He looked at her as if he'd known her all along. And in the span of a heartbeat she knew him too. The biker who had bled in her hands on a stormy highway now stood before her, alive, solid, and terrifyingly calm. The tall man backed up, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We were just talking, man." "She's not yours to talk to," the biker said. His voice was low even, carrying more threat in its quiet than a shout ever could. "Hey, we didn't mean anything. We're leaving." "Yeah," said the one with the cigarette. "No harm done." "Walk," the biker ordered. Something in his tone left no room for argument. The men stumbled over each other trying to leave, vanishing into the mouth of the alley like rats fleeing a flood. For a long second, only the sound of idling engines remained. Lena stood frozen, the adrenaline still burning through her. The biker turned toward her, the rain-slicked light catching the scar on his face. "You okay?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "The highway," she whispered. He nodded once. "You stayed with me." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. 6 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. She remembered the blood, the thunder, the voice she'd barely heard whispering back then, and now here he was. "I'm Cole," he said, his voice quieter now. "Cole Maddox." Lena blinked, trying to find her words. You lived," a faint smile touched his mouth, "because you wouldn't let me die." He glanced at the faint outline of the angel's patch on his jacket, then back at her. "I lead them now. I've seen a lot since that day, but I never forgot your face." Her throat tightened. "You don't owe me anything." He shook his head slowly. "No, you're wrong." He stepped closer, the hum of the bikes behind him steady as a heartbeat. "You gave me more than life. You gave me a reason to fight for it." She wanted to step back, but something in his voice, something raw, almost fragile beneath the steel, held her still. "I swore," he said softly, "that if I ever saw you again, no harm would ever touch you." The engines behind him growled in unison, a silent chorus to his words. Lena felt her pulse slow, fear replaced by something deeper, harder to name. "You don't have to..." Cole's eyes locked on hers. "I do. Some debts can't be repaid. They have to be lived." The air between them was thick with things unsaid. The storm, the blood, the years between. Finally he lifted his hand, calloused fingers open, not demanding but offering. "Come on," he said quietly. "I'll walk you home." Hesitant, she nodded. She took his hand, warm despite the chill. Together they walked down the narrow alley, engines rumbling softly behind them, like guardians in the fading light. When they reached the street, Lena stopped and turned to him. "Why now? Why me?" He studied her for a moment, the scar on his cheek deepening as he smiled faintly. "Because you stayed when everyone else walked away." And for the first time in 6 years, she felt the same strange warmth she'd felt on that highway. Hope, fragile and dangerous, but alive. As she disappeared inside her apartment, Cole stood at the curb, watching until the light in her window flickered on. Then he put his helmet back on, swung a leg over his Harley, and started the engine. The sound rolled down the street like distant thunder. From that moment on, Lena Hart's life was no longer her own. The man she had saved in the storm had returned, and this time he wasn't going anywhere. Morning came too early, as it always did for Lena Hart. The city was wide awake, sun glaring off windows and car roofs, horns blending with the rhythm of life. Yet for her, everything had gone quiet. Ever since that night in the alley, she had felt eyes on her, never threatening, never near enough to startle, just there. It began with glimpses. A glint of chrome across the street when she left work. A shadow leaning against a lamppost near the pharmacy. The faint hum of engines idling half a block away. At first, she thought she was imagining it, her mind frayed by exhaustion and fear. But then she saw him. Cole Maddox, helmet under his arm, standing beside his Harley like a statue carved out of daylight. He didn't speak, didn't move toward her. He only watched long enough to see her cross the street safely before turning away, melting back into the traffic. It happened again the next day, and the next. Sometimes he'd park outside St. Anne's Hospital, sunlight glinting off his jacket patch. Other times she'd catch his reflection in a cafe window while buying coffee, his eyes scanning the crowd like a man trained to see danger before it struck. She wanted to tell him to stop, but she didn't, because for the first time in years she didn't feel invisible. Still, rumors travel faster than gratitude. At the hospital, whispers started like cracks spreading across glass. "That nurse? The one with the biker shadows?" a colleague muttered near the lockers. Another smirked. "Maybe she's mixed up in something. Those guys don't guard people for free." Lena pretended not to hear. She smiled the same professional smile, offered the same calm voice to patients, and kept her head down. But every time she clocked out, she could feel the weight of their stares following her through the automatic doors. That afternoon she stopped by the market to buy groceries. The cashier, a woman she'd spoken to a dozen times before, avoided her eyes. Outside, 2 teenagers whispered and pointed toward a motorcycle parked near the curb. The chrome emblem glinted under the midday sun. Hell's Angels. Lena sighed and kept walking. The sound of engines that once terrified her had become something else entirely, familiar, even reassuring. She didn't know what that said about her. But reassurance couldn't hold back fear when it crept too close. One evening she returned to her apartment building just as the sun was setting. The light in the hallway flickered, throwing weak yellow across the peeling wallpaper. Her key stuck in the lock. Then she saw it. The door was slightly open, her breath caught. She pushed gently, the hinges creaking. The air inside felt wrong. The curtains swayed though the window was closed. A drawer half open, papers scattered on the floor, one of her picture frames lying face down. Someone had been here. Her pulse thundered. She stepped inside, scanning the small living room. Nothing was missing, but everything was touched, shifted just enough to make her skin crawl. She stumbled back into the hallway and dialed the police with shaking fingers. It took them nearly an hour to arrive. 2 officers in crisp uniforms walked through the space, uninterested. They asked if anything valuable was gone. She said no. They shrugged. "Probably kids messing around," one said, writing lazily in his notebook. "If it happens again, call us." When they left, The apartment felt emptier than before. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, her eyes fixed on the open window. She tried to convince herself she was fine, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Then she heard it, the low, steady growl of engines outside. She froze. Pulling the curtain back, she saw them, 4 bikes parked along the curb, engines idling like a heartbeat. At the center stood Cole, his jacket unzipped, his hair tousled by the wind. He scanned the street slowly, his gaze sharp, patient. When his eyes found her through the window, he nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Lena's breath caught between relief and disbelief. She opened the door, stepping out onto the landing as the daylight bled into dusk. Cole was already at the bottom of the stairs by the time she reached the first step. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, steady as always. "Someone was inside my apartment," she said. "They didn't take anything." He looked past her shoulder, eyes narrowing. "That's not random. They were trying to scare you. The police said it was nothing." Cole let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, it's always nothing until it's too late." He walked past her into the hallway, scanning every corner like a soldier clearing a battlefield. "They left through the back," he muttered, pointing to faint footprints near the doorframe. "Whoever it was, they wanted you to know they could get in." Lena shivered. "Why me?" Cole turned, his expression unreadable. "Because of me," she frowned. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Word gets around. Not everyone's happy that I've been keeping an eye on you." Lena stared at him. "You mean people from your world?" He nodded. "Enemies, rivals, men who think hurting you hurts me. They're wrong, but they'll keep trying." Her voice cracked. "Then maybe you should stay away." For the first time, his composure wavered. "You think distance keeps you safe? They already found your door." He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life, Lena. I'm not letting anyone take yours." His certainty was both comforting and terrifying. "I can't live like this," she said, trembling. "People are starting to talk. They think I'm one of you." Cole's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. They didn't kneel in the rain with blood on their hands. They didn't whisper me back to life." The silence that followed was thick. Rain from an earlier shower dripped from the gutters outside, tapping against the pavement in rhythm with her heartbeat. Finally, she whispered, "You can't protect everyone." He met her eyes. "Just one is enough." She didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to scream at him to leave, to take the engines and the danger with him. But another part, deeper, quieter, felt something she hadn't felt in years: safety. Cole stepped back toward the stairwell, his shadow long against the dim light. "You won't be alone tonight," he said. "My guys will stay outside. If anything moves near this building, I'll know." Lena opened her mouth to protest, but the words never came. He was already walking down the steps, his boots echoing softly. The roar of engines followed a moment later, fading to a low hum beneath her window. She stood there for a long time, staring into the dark. When she finally turned off the lights and sat on her bed, the noise of the city blurred into the steady rhythm of the bikes outside. It should have scared her. It didn't, because for the first time since the storm, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. And that realization, as dangerous as it was, made her close her eyes and whisper to herself, "Stay with me." It started with the smell. Not smoke at first, something lighter, sharper, a faint metallic tang that didn't belong in a home. Lena Hart noticed it the moment she walked into her apartment after a long morning shift. Her mother was asleep in the bedroom, the oxygen machine humming its steady rhythm, the only sound that meant safety. Sunlight poured through the half-open curtains, painting everything in gold. For once, things felt almost normal. Then she smelled it again. Her smile faded. She turned toward the hallway, frowning. The scent was stronger now, acrid, chemical, wrong. Her pulse quickened. "Mom?" she called softly. No answer. Lena took a step forward and froze. Wisps of smoke curled from the bottom of the front door. The floor trembled faintly. Then, with a deep, muffled boom, heat surged through the hallway. The world went red. Flames licked up the walls in seconds, devouring the cheap paint, racing toward the ceiling. Lena staggered back, coughing as black smoke filled the air. She could barely see 2 feet in front of her. Somewhere beyond the haze, her mother coughed weakly. "Mom, hold on!" She ran to the bedroom, pulling the blanket away. Evelyn's frail form trembled, confusion in her eyes. "What's happening?" "It's okay," Lena lied, sliding her arms under her mother's shoulders. "We're getting out." The hallway was already a furnace. Fire ate through the picture frames, the couch, the life she had built. Heat clawed at her skin, the oxygen tank hissing as she dragged her mother toward the door. She tried to cover her mother's mouth with the edge of her sleeve, but the air was thick, suffocating. Halfway down the hall, her knees buckled. The smoke was too heavy. Every breath burned. She looked toward the door. It felt miles away. The flames roared like a living thing, mocking her. This is where it ends, she thought. She tightened her grip on her mother and whispered through the choking air, "Stay with me." And then the door exploded inward. A blast of cooler air rushed through the hallway, followed by the sound of boots and engines. Figures stormed through the smoke, dark shapes moving with purpose. The first one broke through the fire like a force of nature, Cole Maddox. His leather jacket was streaked with ash, his eyes fierce and focused. Behind him came 4 men from the Angels, their vests black against the orange glow. Cole's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "Not today!" He scooped Evelyn into his arms with a strength that didn't belong to a man but to a promise. "Got her!" he shouted to his crew. "Take her!" One of them yelled back, grabbing Lena by the wrist before she collapsed. "No, wait!" she gasped, coughing. "The oxygen!" "We've got it!" another biker shouted, ripping the tubing from the machine and slinging the tank over his shoulder. The hallway began to groan, wood and plaster splitting under the heat. Cole moved fast, his boots pounding the floor as he carried Evelyn through the door, shielding her from falling debris. Behind him, the others guided Lena through the flames, their jackets catching sparks that died against soaked leather. Outside, the daylight was blinding. Neighbors screamed. Someone shouted for the fire department. Sirens wailed in the distance, but the roar of the Harleys drowned them out. Cole lowered Evelyn onto the sidewalk, kneeling beside her. Her breathing was ragged but steady. "Breathe, ma'am," he said softly. "You're safe now." Lena dropped beside her mother, tears streaking clean lines through the soot on her face. She clutched her mother's hand, shaking, sobbing, alive. Cole stood, chest heaving, watching the flames tear through what was left of the building. His jaw was tight, the scar on his cheek catching the sunlight. One of his men approached, eyes hard. This wasn't random. "I know," Cole said. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "They wanted a message." Lena looked up at him, her voice hoarse. "Who did this?" He turned to her, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "People who think they can use you to get to me," her breath caught. "Because of what you are." He nodded slowly. "Because of what you did. You saved the wrong man's life, Lena, and now they're trying to make you regret it." Before she could respond, a firefighter rushed over, shouting orders, herding people back. The blaze had already claimed half the building. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence, phones out, filming the bikers who had carried 2 women from the fire. Someone murmured, "Those are angels." Another voice answered, "Yeah, but they just saved them." Cole ignored the whispers. He stepped close to Lena, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "They wanted you scared. They wanted you broken. But you don't burn while I breathe." The words hit her harder than the fire had. Tears welled in her eyes again. She wanted to tell him he couldn't fight the whole world for her, that he didn't owe her this, but the words stuck in her throat. He looked back at the burning building, flames reflecting off the chrome of the parked bikes. His men stood like sentinels, smoke curling around them, the sunlight turning the scene surreal. Hell wrapped in daylight. Firefighters took over, pulling hoses, shouting commands. Cole guided Lena and her mother toward an ambulance, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Go with them. Get checked." She hesitated. "What about you?" He gave a half smile. "Fire doesn't scare me." As the medics lifted Evelyn into the ambulance, Lena climbed in beside her. Through the open doors she saw Cole standing in the street, surrounded by his brothers, the sunlight gleaming off their bikes. The sirens reflected in his eyes, red and blue and burning gold. For a moment, time stilled. The storm she'd once met him in had found its echo in fire, and again he had walked straight into it for her. As the doors closed, she whispered his name, barely audible over the engine. "Cole." But he didn't move. He stood watching until the ambulance turned the corner, his figure shrinking in the rear window, smoke rising behind him. Inside the vehicle, Lena took her mother's hand, the heat of the fire still clinging to her skin. Evelyn coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open. "That man!" she rasped. "The one with the scar. He's been outside every night, hasn't he?" Lena's throat tightened. "Yeah, he has." Her mother smiled faintly, voice fragile but sure. "He carries something heavy. And it's your name on it." Lena turned toward the window. The city passed by in streaks of light and shadow. For the first time she realized that protection and danger could come from the same man, and sometimes that was the only kind of safety life offered. When the ambulance disappeared into the maze of streets, the smoke still rose behind them, curling into the bright sky. And on the curb, Cole Maddox watched until the last trace was gone, his hands clenched, his vow renewed in silence, because some debts, he knew, weren't paid in words. They were lived again and again, even through fire. The smell of smoke still clung to Cole Maddox's jacket, even after days of sunlight, even after the fire trucks had left and the ashes cooled, it lingered. A reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything again. The clubhouse was packed that afternoon. Chrome gleamed under fluorescent lights, leather creaked, and the air hung thick with tension. The walls, lined with flags and photos of fallen brothers, felt smaller than usual. The Angels weren't a quiet family. They were loud, loyal, and brutal when loyalty was questioned. And right now, every eye in that room was fixed on him. Cole stood at the head of the table, his hands flat against the wood, his expression carved from stone. Around him sat the council. Men who had bled beside him for years, men who would ride into hell for him, or used to. A heavy silence stretched before one of them finally spoke. "She's not one of us," said Briggs, a veteran rider with scars older than Cole's leadership. "You've got us watching a nurse while rivals move in on our docks. What are we, babysitters now?" Laughter rippled, bitter and low. Cole didn't flinch. "You done?" Briggs leaned back, cigarette between his fingers. "Not even close. You're the president. You bring us into wars worth fighting. But this?" He flicked ash toward the floor. "This is a death wish over a woman who doesn't wear the patch." The words hit like sparks on dry fuel. Cole let the silence hang a heartbeat longer, then spoke, his voice low but carrying through the room. "That woman pulled me back from the dead. I was bleeding out on a highway when the world drove past. She stopped, his eyes cut across the table, hard as steel. If that doesn't matter to you, then tell me what the hell this patch means." A murmur moved through the room, some nodding, some looking away. The truth in his words was a weight no one could easily deny. But Briggs wasn't done. "You're thinking with your heart, not your head. That's not how we survive out there." Cole took a step closer, the floor creaking under his boots. "You think survival's all we are? I've buried men who lived by that rule. They died with nothing but fear to their name." Another man, Kincaid, younger, restless, spoke up. "The word's out, Cole. The Reapers know about her. They saw what happened with the fire. They're saying you've got a soft spot." Cole's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. They're not just talking," Kincaid said. He pulled something from his jacket and tossed it onto the table. A knife. Its blade was clean, but a piece of paper was skewered through the handle. Cole unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, scrawled in black ink. "Leave her or you burn too." The room went silent. Briggs whistled under his breath. "They're calling you out, brother. You know what that means." Cole crumpled the note in his fist, veins standing out along his arm. "Yeah, it means they think I can be broken." He threw the knife aside, the blade clattering across the table. "They're wrong." Without another word, he walked out. The door slammed behind him, the echo ringing through the hall like a gunshot. Outside, the sun was blinding. Cole took a long breath, letting the heat burn away the cold that had crept into his chest. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he already knew by heart. "Lena," he said when she answered. Her voice was cautious. "Cole, what's wrong?" He hesitated. "We need to talk." An hour later they met behind the hospital. The noise of the city faded there, replaced by the hum of ventilation fans and the cooing of pigeons. She stood with her arms crossed, still in her scrubs, hair tied back, the sunlight catching the soot still faintly staining her hands. "I told you this would happen," she said before he could speak. "The fire, the threats, this is because of you, isn't it?" He didn't answer right away. His silence was enough. Lena shook her head, her voice breaking. "You can't keep living like this, Cole. You can't fight the world every time someone looks at me wrong." He met her eyes. "I'm not fighting the world. I'm fighting the kind of men who'd burn down an old woman's home to make a point." Her shoulders sagged. "You don't owe me this." "You've already saved us." He took a slow step closer. "You don't get it. This isn't about owing. It's about who I am now. The man who would have let someone die in the rain is gone. You made sure of that." Lena's throat tightened. "You can't build your life around paying back something that never asked to be paid." Cole's expression softened for the first time. "Some debts aren't repaid," he said quietly. "They're lived." The words hung between them like the echo of thunder. Lena turned away, blinking back tears. "And what happens when your brothers turn on you, when they decide I'm not worth the fight?" "They already have," he said simply, "and I'm still standing." She faced him again, anger and fear battling in her eyes. "You'll get yourself killed, then at least it'll mean something." The sound of his conviction scared her more than any threat could. She wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away, but deep down she knew he wouldn't. He couldn't. He glanced past her shoulder toward the street. "You should stay with your mother for a while. I'll have my guys set up around the building. I don't want bodyguards." "They're not for you," he said. "They're for me. I sleep better knowing you're safe." The conversation ended there. He left the way he always did, quietly, without looking back. That night, Lena sat by her mother's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. The oxygen machine hummed like a heartbeat. She thought of Cole out there somewhere, surrounded by men who questioned his loyalty, hunted by enemies who knew exactly how to hurt him. Outside, in the parking lot, a group of Harleys idled under the streetlights, the riders' silhouettes unmoving. Their engines thrummed low, patient. Lena whispered into the dark, "He's going to get himself killed for me." Her mother stirred. Maybe, she said weakly, but maybe he's just living for the first time. Somewhere across town, Cole stood with his brothers, planning the next move. The knife's message replayed in his mind. He could almost hear the rain again, the whisper of her voice years ago. Stay with me. He wasn't planning on letting go. Not now, not ever. Days bled together after the fire, soft and quiet in a way that felt wrong. The world outside moved on, pretending nothing had happened. But for Lena Hart, silence had never felt heavier. Her mother was healing, slowly, miraculously. The doctors said it would take time, but every morning Evelyn's color returned a little more. The nurses who once gossiped about Lena now spoke in hushed tones of admiration, retelling the story of the bikers who'd stormed through fire to save them. To the world it was a miracle. To Lena it was something harder to define, a debt she hadn't asked for, one that seemed to grow larger every day. Cole Maddox never left her orbit. She didn't always see him, but she felt him, his shadow stretching quietly across her days. His men were everywhere. A parked bike at the corner near the pharmacy. A familiar silhouette leaning against a lamppost when she walked home from work. No words, no noise, just presence. Once, when she stepped out of the hospital late at night, she found her car tires replaced, the new ones gleaming, her old bald set nowhere to be found. Another time she came home to discover her front door fixed, the new lock smooth and heavy, her key turning without effort. No note, no message, just the faint scent of motor oil lingering on the handle. He never took credit, but she always knew. Then one evening, a week after the fire, she came home to find him on her balcony. Cole sat on the railing, jacket half unzipped, his gaze on the city below. The last light of sunset painted the skyline in gold and red. For a second she didn't move. "You shouldn't be up here," she said finally. He turned, a faint smile cutting through his scar. "You left the door unlocked." She crossed her arms. "You changed the lock. Didn't think you'd notice." "I notice everything now," she said softly. Cole looked back toward the city. "Good. That's how you stay alive." The words hung there, strange and sad. She joined him, leaning against the railing, her shoulder inches from his. "You don't have to keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Watching over me." He didn't answer at first. The hum of engines far below filled the silence. "It's not something I do," he said finally. "It's who I am." Lena turned to him. "You were bleeding on that highway. You almost died. How did you end up here? This version of you?" He took a deep breath. "When you're given a second chance, you start asking what it's for. I used to ride for pride, for power, for the noise, but after that night I rode for something else, for the people who don't walk away." She studied him, the lines on his face, the wear of a life that had demanded too much. "You don't have to pay me back for what happened." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just living it." The honesty in his voice left her breathless. Later that night, after her mother had gone to bed, Lena found herself pacing the kitchen. The hum of the fridge filled the silence, grounding her. She heard a knock, 3 soft taps. When she opened the door, Cole stood there, his right hand wrapped in a dirty bandage, blood seeping through the gauze. "What happened?" she demanded. "Nothing serious. That's not nothing." She pulled him inside, grabbing the first aid kit from under the sink. He winced as she unwrapped his hand, revealing bruised knuckles and a deep gash. "Got into a disagreement," he muttered. "With who? Someone who needed convincing to stay out of your life." Her eyes flicked to his face. "Cole, don't," he said quietly. "Don't ask me to stop. It's already done." She cleaned the wound, pressing a fresh bandage over it. The silence between them shifted, heavier but not uncomfortable. He watched her with that steady, unreadable calm. "You're still a terrible patient," she said, trying to smile. "I was worse the first time," he replied. "At least now I can sit up." That made her laugh, small, unexpected. It broke something in both of them. When she finished, she stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" "Every day," he said, "but it's the only thing that keeps me honest." They ended up on the balcony again, two shadows against the glow of the city. The engines below were gone now, leaving only the sound of distant traffic. Lena handed him a mug of coffee, both hands around it to keep steady. "You don't sleep much, do you?" He shook his head. "Not when the world's still turning. Must be loud in your head," she said quietly. He chuckled. "You have no idea." The laughter faded into stillness. For once, the silence between them wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge. She looked out at the skyline, her voice soft. "Why me, Cole?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked. The same way he had on that highway, rain pouring down, life slipping through his fingers. "Finally," he said, "because you stayed when everyone else walked away." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Lena blinked fast, eyes stinging. "You keep saying that like it's something extraordinary. It's not. Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said simply. "They wouldn't have." The honesty in his tone left no room for argument. She looked down at the coffee cooling in her hands. "I don't know how to live with all this, Cole. The fire, the danger, He smiled faintly. "You don't have to live with me. Just don't live afraid." The city lights shimmered on his face, softening the hard edges of him. For a moment she saw not the biker, not the fighter, but the man she'd met in the rain, gasping for life while she whispered for him to hold on. He stood, setting the empty mug on the railing. "I should go. Will you ever stop showing up?" she asked. "Not while you still need someone to stay." He turned and disappeared into the stairwell, his footsteps fading. Lena stayed there long after he was gone, the night pressing soft and warm against her skin. Down below, the faint echo of an engine rolled through the quiet, steady, patient, protective. For the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She didn't feel alone. She felt something else, something dangerous and healing at once. Hope. The news spread faster than the smoke ever had. By the end of the week, every local station had run the same headline: "Biker gang saves nurse and her mother from apartment fire." What had once been whispers of fear turned into murmurs of awe. People replayed the footage again and again, grainy clips from phones showing men in leather charging through flames, carrying two women into the light. At St. Anne's Hospital, Lena Hart walked the same corridors she always had, but something in the air had shifted. Colleagues who used to avoid her gaze now nodded when she passed. One even smiled. The same nurses who once whispered about the biker nurse now said her name with respect. Still, Lena didn't feel like a hero. She only felt tired, grateful, confused. That afternoon, when her shift ended, she stepped outside into the clear daylight. The air was bright and sharp, the kind that made everything look cleaner than it really was. She adjusted her bag, ready to walk home, when she saw them. A line of Harleys parked neatly across the street, chrome catching the sun, jackets stitched with the Angel's emblem glowing in the light. People slowed to stare, some with fear, others with fascination. And at the center stood Cole Maddox. He was leaning against his bike, helmet under his arm, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The scar on his cheek caught the sunlight like a silver thread. When Lena crossed the street toward him, the world seemed to quiet, the noise of the city fading behind the steady hum of engines. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Cole shrugged. "News travels. Couldn't let them tell our story without seeing how it ends." "Our story?" she asked, an edge of disbelief in her tone. He chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm not looking for a headline." She smiled despite herself. "You already have one." They stood there for a moment, sunlight between them. Then Lena spoke, her voice low. "You changed my life." Cole looked at her, his expression steady. "You saved mine first." Simple words, heavy truth. For a moment they were silent, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then Cole stepped forward, close enough that the scent of leather and smoke reached her. "You know," he said quietly, "when I woke up in that hospital 6 years ago, all I remembered was rain and your voice telling me to breathe. I never thought I'd get the chance to return that favor." Lena blinked against the sunlight. "Maybe we're even now," he smiled faintly. "Not even close." Behind them, the other angels started their engines, the sound rolling through the street like distant thunder. People stopped to watch, unsure if they were witnessing danger or devotion. Cole looked at Lena one last time. "Take care of your mom, I'll be around." "I know," she said. He nodded, swung a leg over his bike and started the engine. The roar was deep, alive. As the line of Harleys moved down the street, sunlight flashed off chrome and black leather, the sound echoing off glass and stone like a promise. Lena watched until they disappeared around the corner, the hum fading but never fully gone. It wasn't just noise, it was a heartbeat that reminded her she wasn't alone. For the first time, the city saw them for what they really were, not criminals, not myths, but men who burned through hell to keep a promise. And as she turned back toward the hospital, Lena couldn't help but smile through the brightness. Kindness, she realized, never dies. It just finds its way back, sometimes on 2 wheels. Months passed before the smell of smoke finally faded from Lena Hart's clothes. Life settled into something resembling normal, though normal had changed its meaning forever. Her mother healed faster than the doctors predicted, the color returning to her cheeks, her laughter soft but real. The new apartment was small but safe, with sunlight pooling through the windows instead of fire. Every morning, Lena brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for the space on the counter where Cole sometimes leaned when he stopped by. He never warned her he was coming, he never stayed long. But when he appeared, helmet tucked under his arm, boots echoing against the tile, everything in the room seemed to stand still. Sometimes he'd fix things that didn't need fixing, a creaky window hinge, a loose railing. Once he replaced a light bulb that wasn't even burnt out. "Better safe than sorry," he'd said, and she had smiled because she knew it wasn't the bulb he was worried about, it was her. Other times, they didn't talk at all. They'd sit on the balcony with coffee mugs warming their hands, watching the city move below. Lena learned to recognize the sound of his bike before she saw him, the low, familiar growl that sent her heartbeat chasing the rhythm of the engine. It no longer sounded like danger, it sounded like presence. One afternoon she found him outside her building, standing in the shade beside his Harley. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, blood drying along a scrape on his arm. "You're hurt again," she said, stepping forward. He shrugged. "Just another night." She frowned. "Another fight?" "Another reminder," he said, looking up at her. "That peace isn't given. You make it. You protect it." She wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she took his hand, led him upstairs, and patched him up in silence. When she finished, she looked at the rough bandage around his arm and said softly, "I keep fixing pieces of you, but you keep breaking yourself for me." Cole smiled, the scar on his cheek deepening. "Maybe we're even now." Lena shook her head. "Not even close." He looked at her then, really looked, the same way he had in the rain years ago when he was half dead and she refused to let him go. "You saved me, Lena," he said, "but you didn't just keep me breathing, you gave me something to breathe for." Her voice trembled. "You don't owe me anything, Cole." "I know," he said, "that's why it matters." The silence that followed was warm, fragile, unspoken, the kind of silence that happens when 2 people finally stop fighting fate and simply accept it. That night, after he left, Lena stood on the balcony long after the sound of his engine disappeared. The city glowed beneath her. Windows lit, streets humming, life carrying on. She thought about the highway where she'd first found him, the storm, the rain in her eyes, the sound of his heart fighting to keep rhythm. She thought about the fire, the smoke, the roar of engines that had carried her and her mother back into the world. Every moment had been chaos, pain, noise, but beneath it all was one constant, a choice. She had stayed, and because she did, a stranger had lived. Because he lived, her world had changed. Weeks later, she returned to the same stretch of highway. The sky was clear now, sunlight glittering on the asphalt. She parked at the shoulder and stood there, closing her eyes, feeling the wind rush past. She remembered the way it had smelled that night, rain and metal and blood. The way his pulse had fluttered beneath her fingers. The way she'd whispered, "Stay with me." When she opened her eyes again, she saw a single Harley approaching from the distance, its engine deep and familiar. It slowed as it neared, the rider lifting his visor just enough for her to see the ghost of a smile beneath it. She didn't need to wave, he didn't need to stop. Their eyes met for a second, sunlight flashing off chrome, and then he was gone, swallowed by the horizon. The wind carried the echo of the engine long after he'd disappeared. It wasn't loud, it was steady, almost like a heartbeat fading into memory. Lena exhaled, her chest light. "Stay with me," she whispered again, not as a plea this time, but as a promise. Because some people never really leave. They live in the echoes they create, in the lives they touch, in the quiet miracles they never meant to start. And maybe that's what kindness truly is, a spark passed from one heart to another until it becomes its own kind of fire. As the camera of memory pulled back from the highway, the narrator's voice would have been calm, steady, certain. She once knelt in the rain for a dying man. Years later, he stood in the sun for the woman who refused to walk away. Kindness doesn't vanish. It circles back, sometimes on two wheels. If this story reminded you that compassion is never wasted and loyalty never forgotten, stay with us. Subscribe to Heart Tales for more stories of courage, redemption, and humanity. Type 1 if this is your first ride with us, 2 if you've come back for more, and 3 if you never miss a single story. On your screen right now, more journeys are waiting, because every act of kindness starts a chain reaction.